All right, we're going to get started. We always start at 12:15. Welcome. My name is Derek Mosley. I'm the director of Marquette Law School's Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. I want to welcome you to our On the Issues program featuring Sister Helen Prejean. Oh, look at you. So we'll get to that. Sister Helen Prejean is known all around the world for her tireless work against the death penalty. In fact, her advocacy is the reason why this conversation about capital punishment has been thrusted into the national dialogue. Sister Helen Prejean has written 3 books, Dead Man Walking, The Death of Innocence, and River of Fire. Dead Man Walking, of course, was made into a movie. The movie starred Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn. Susan Sarandon won her only Oscar playing Sister Helen Prejean in that movie. It's been a play, it's been an opera, and just recently made into a graphic novel. So if you could all join me in welcoming our guest speaker today, Sister Helen Prejean.
Glad to be with you. It's Holy Week. It's the week when Jesus was executed. It's the week we remember where he had the final meal with his apostles, his beloved friends. And that's remembered because he ate with them so often. So I'm glad to see that food is part of this, because eating and the gathering of the community for food is such an important part of the whole Christian tradition. So to me, it has been amazing that as I got involved with executions and the whole thing of the Christian mystery of Jesus being executed, this cross is called the Jerusalem cross. It has a lot of crosses on it because right outside of Jerusalem was where people were hung and executed. And they were either tied so that they just died from lack of nourishment and water. And the real method of death for crucifixion was asphyxiation. You just didn't have the power to pull your body up to take a breath. And we just killed a man in Louisiana with nitrogen gas, which sucks all the oxygen out of your body. We are still doing it. And there could be 1,000 people going into Jerusalem, and they could see 1,000 people hung on these trees and being executed. And the execution of Jesus, when they were announcing getting the gospel out there to talk about Jesus, who showed us the path as the Savior of the world, of the love that keeps on giving, the love of your enemies, the love, the forgiveness. For a long time, they didn't put any kind of crucifixion symbol up because it was such a scandal. How are you going to say, let me tell you about the Savior of the world and what he taught? Oh, but they executed him as a criminal. The shame that is in executions. I've been with these families that have buried their children who've been executed by the state. I mean, Mrs. Sonia couldn't even go in a grocery store, her son Patrick and son Eddie. It's the first story in Dead Man Walking. And they had killed in cold blood a teenage couple. Horrible crimes. And then they're going to be executed. But here's the thing about hate as a policy. Because you sure can't tell a person when you're going to execute them that you're loving them. You can't. I mean, this is hatred, right? Spelled out in policy. You kill. We're going to do to you what you did to your victim. We're going to kill you. So here's Mrs. Sonia. She had people in the little town of St. Martinville. It's out where a lot of Cajun people live, throwing dead animals on her front porch. When she'd go in the grocery store, people would say loud enough for her to hear. That's that white trash woman whose sons killed the Bourque and the LeBlanc kids. And so she was like a little refuge in the town, closed her blinds, turned off her phone, and had her daughter go out to get her food. So as though when you have a policy that you killed, we're going to kill you. But don't hate his mama now. Love his family. As if you can drop a drop of red dye into a whole bowl of water and say, don't spread. The hatred spreads to the family. The saddest funeral in my life that I've ever been to are mothers burying their children after they have been executed. So that, it was called Golgotha, the place of skulls. And after people were executed, they were left to just rot on the cross, and birds would come and eat, and then they were all just thrown into a big pit. That's what happened to Jesus. Now, when the Gospels were written, the perspective of faith, where there was reflection on the prophets in the Old Testament and what had happened, the perspective about the death of Jesus, to say that actually Jesus' death was a moment he was glorified. That's what the Gospel of John does. But it was terrible. And not only that happened to him, but all of his friends fled. And one of them betrayed him, turned him over. They have that, the words, he was handed over. And I think of all the young people thrown into our penal system. By the time, boy, those policemen put those handcuffs on their hands behind their backs and they are pushed into that police car, they are handed over into a system. And what happens to them is really up to question in a lot of ways. It's only poor people selected for death. So I descend into it, I want to say, by grace. You're brought into the holy mysteries. Some of it is just part of our life, our parents dying or our close friends, or, you know, when we face the death of someone, we're up against the big mystery. This is the big one. You're handed over into this mystery that's bigger than us, that we don't understand and that we don't control. And our faith is brought to the fore and tested. But here's the thing I discovered about grace, that grace wakes us up when we're ready for it. So it took a while for me to wake up that faith and the following of Jesus had to do with justice, with social justice. So the thing about growing up in privilege is you don't know you're privileged. You know, everybody you're going to school with, going to a good school like Marquette. But I grew up in the Jim Crow days in Louisiana, where black people couldn't even ride on the front of the bus, couldn't go in a restaurant. Y'all heard about the Green Book that was written? That was a really necessary manual for black families traveling, because you were in these sunset communities where black people couldn't be seen after sunset, and they couldn't go in restaurants, and they couldn't get gas in places. So here's where you go. Who are the people you contact? And I grew up in that. Pretty oblivious. My daddy was a successful lawyer in Baton Rouge. We lived in a big house in the front. A black couple worked. Now, I only knew black people as our servants. I didn't go to school with black kids. I never met black people as my peers. And I just accepted that that's the way things were. And, you know, mama, here's the culture. Good mom and daddy, kind. Daddy even helped Ellen and Jesse buy a house, helped Jesse get a good job in the refinery. Kindness, charity, but not justice. What about the Jim Crow law? What about what happens to people and the shame? Simply by being black, you got the house detective following you in the department store. Simply by being black, somebody's going to say to you, oh, you're really a credit for your race. I mean, all the signals that you got that you were inferior. I'm reading the book right now called The Three Mothers. It's the mother of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Baldwin, James Baldwin. And what their fathers went through, what the intergenerational onslaught against dignity. I don't know how those men didn't blow up. I just don't know how. The shame, you can't eat here. James Baldwin one time was with a white friend, and they went into a restaurant, And the waitress came up and said, you can't eat here. And he was so furious. He took a pitcher of water and threw it. It was like the 15th time. How do you keep getting that signal? You're inferior, you're inferior, you're inferior. And it was written in the law. There's a book called The Color of Law, of what neighborhood you could move in. I just read the life of Clarence Darrow. I think that man had more compassion for everybody than anybody I've ever read. He would take these cases, and Thurgood Marshall, there's a book, Devil in the Grove, about Thurgood Marshall. See, and I get to hang out with these kind of lawyers, because these lawyers in the South, we got a governor right now that's lining up to people to execute them. A good Catholic governor. And here he is, he's so pro-life. And he's lining up people, he's already got 2 people lined up for execution. One naturally died, God interfered with the plan. But then we just had a man executed with nitrogen gas. I mean, he had the veterinarians having a press conference saying how they don't use nitrogen gas to euthanize animals because it's too cruel. So here they are at the press conference, here are the animals at the press conference, the little dogs with little signs saying don't gas humans. So the animals trying to talk to us about what are we doing? How is this possible that in this country we are still lining up people for death and killing them? What has propped that up? What has allowed that to happen? So I've reflected on that a lot. I hadn't reflected on it at all until I had a moment, it's a moment of grace, and I'll tell you about it in Dead Man Walking, of hearing we went to a conference. Nuns are always going to conferences. And we had this social justice nun who was going to be talking to us. I wasn't too excited about this. I was doing a lot of retreats. I'd made the spiritual exercises, the St. Ignatius, and retreats, and helping people be prayerful and holy and charitable. That's all on you. But be kind to the people around you. But justice is going to be much wider than that and much deeper than that. And anyway, so I still remember the words that changed the spiritual trajectory of my life. And I want to just say this to you. When we gather like this, the Spirit of God is in us. And we never know when that moment of fire, when that moment of awakening is going to happen in us. Pope Francis talks a lot about discerning how God's Spirit is moving. He talks about the surprises. So I got a great surprise. Because here comes his sister, and she'd been talking about how unfair things were, the rich countries of the world, poor countries of the world. I knew that. I knew the statistics. And the next day she said she'd talk about Jesus. I'm thinking, bring on King Jesus. Let's have some Jesus talk. And she said, Jesus preached good news to the poor. And how many times had I meditated, read those words of the gospel, and I always thought, well, the good news is you're suffering with Jesus now. Your children are dying because they don't have health care. You know, you're suffering now, but it's like you accept your sufferings, and one day you're going to be given a great reward in heaven. And Sister Maria Augusta Neal said, integral to good news to poor people is that you do not have to accept the poverty and the suffering. You have a right to struggle for what is rightfully yours. And I didn't know anything about struggle. I had grown up so privileged. And I thought, I don't even know any poor people. And you know what I discovered? It's not when you wake up. It's what you do after you wake up that's really important. That we move in some kind of way into action. And when I heard those words, integral to the good news to poor people, is that they have a right to struggle That it's not God's will for some people to be poor, some people to be rich. And so you just thank God for your blessings because here you are, you know. Maybe you're among the privileged ones. But what about them? And I mean, the whole thrust of the gospel is Jesus is always in the company of people and reaching out to people, the vulnerable, the excluded, the poor. And I got it. And I came back to New Orleans and I began to volunteer at a place called Hope House. I had never been into the inner city of New Orleans. 50% of our people, our African-American people, live in poverty in New Orleans. And all the rules are different. I'm going to find out when I moved in and began to live among African-American people. For the first time in my life as my peers, I got to know people as my neighbors. I got to know people. And everything changed. I was writing in my journal. I was looking at the Gospels in a new way. I'm reading the life of Martin Luther King. I'm reading the life of Dorothy Day and what she did to start the Catholic worker communities for homeless and poor people in New York. And I'm ready for change. I'm ready. My soul, you see, our soul gets ready for stuff. I think there was a part of me that was like a little balloon hitting the ceiling. I was kind of waiting for this stuff, resisting this social justice stuff, but boom, I heard those words, came back, moved into St. Thomas, and that's how Dead Man Walking begins. River of Fire will tell you the whole spiritual journey of childhood on up and how I grew up and, you know, how do we awaken? You ever think of that? How do we awaken? We awaken by people we meet and talk to. We awaken by books we read. I didn't know the power of a book. I resisted a long time writing that book, Dead Man Walking, because I thought, well, it's better to talk to people, you know? I'm from Louisiana. You have a crawfish bar in the backyard for 3 hours, and you're drinking beer and talking. You're going to talk to each other. I mean, a book, I just thought of it as kind of passive, you know? I had to sit in the bookstore. Didn't even have like a little finger that could come out of the book. Hey, read me, read me. So I resisted it. But then the fire happened. See, St. Bonaventure says, don't ask for understanding. Ask for the fire. The fire. And look what a theme that is in Scripture. Elijah goes up in a chariot of fire. The burning bush that Moses sees, fire. Something is consumed, but yet it's not consumed. Pentecost is fire. So we're in Holy Week, going through the mystery of this Savior of the world who was executed as a common criminal, and he was resurrected. The emptying of his godhood, Philippians 2. He emptied himself. He became identified with the most vulnerable. Who would he be with in our society now? Would he be with the migrants being sent out of this country, seeking asylum? Who would he be with now? Think of it. And where's your own heart calling you? Who do you need to be with? So what happened then in St. Thomas, I'm in the soil. The soil is tilled. I'm looking. I'm awakened to justice. And one day comes this friend of mine from the Louisiana Coalition of Jails and Prisons. I'd never been in a prison before. And here he is coming down St. Andrew Street. He had a little clipboard. I call this Sneaky Jesus Part 1. Y'all may have heard of this Sneaky Jesus thing. Well, here comes Sneaky Jesus right now. And everybody met. He's asking to be a part of this little project that he was part of, and he bumps into me. He said, hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal to somebody on death row here in Louisiana? I said, yeah, sure. I'll be a pen pal. I was an English major. Write some nice letters, send a few poems. I thought I was only going to be writing letters. And so he gave me his name, Patrick Saunier. Remember sitting down writing that first letter. I had never addressed an envelope like that before. Death row. You live on waiting to die street, waiting to be killed street, death row. Angola, Louisiana. Named after the slaves that came from Angola that worked on the plantation that became Angola. They still call it the farm. And you look at the connection between slavery and the penal system. Look at Louisiana. In fact, look at every penal institution we have. What are all those plantation owners going to do when the slaves got freed? Where are they going to get their workers? And boy, right away you start moving into convict leasing. Loitering was a big thing. You grab a black man off the street, put him in jail, serves the time in jail. Time up, time to get out. Oh, you owe us for lodging and you owe us for food. Then they load him in a truck and he ends up in a penal institution in convict labor. When you go to Angola today, our prison in Louisiana, the starting pay is 2.5 cents an hour. And you go out and you work in the fields. Cotton, soybeans. So, hey, Sister Helen, you want to write a letter to somebody on death row? Sure. I'll write the man. You know what the problem was? He wrote back. And he never asked me for anything. He didn't ask me for money for cigarettes. He was just so glad somebody had found him. And then he said, Sister, well, look, you're a Catholic nun. I'm a Catholic. Would you be my spiritual advisor? Fill out, send some visitor forms, fill them out. Sneaky Jesus Part 2. Because when I filled out that form, spiritual advisor, I had no idea that 2.5 years later, he is going to be electrocuted to death right after midnight on April 5th, 1984. And I'm going to be with him, saying to him, look at my face when they do this, and I'll be the face of Christ for you. I was just brought right into the whole mystery of the whole thing of a protocol of death that was amazing to me. I mean, people were actually polite. One of the guards that was going to execute Timothy Baldwin actually whispered to him, hey, Tim, look, you got to understand, this is nothing personal, okay? Because they get caught. Good people get caught in this, and we have to think about that. Who are the people doing the killing for us, whose job is to take people and kill them? So now with this new governor lining up people to kill them on death row, we happen to have a reformed warden who really cares about the people on death row. He visits them in their cells. He opens the cells every morning at 7 o'clock for them to have freedom of movement, to participate in sports. He treats them like human beings. And that's an occupational hazard if you're then going to be the one called to officiate at a person's execution. Look how unreal this thing is. And you know what the thing is? This is the big thing. It's hidden from our eyes. It's a semi-secret ritual. You'll never see it. Look at the executions that just went on in the last month. 5 of them. They're coming in the southern states again. You see a new wave of executions happening. South Carolina just shot a man to death. They had a firing squad. They're not trying to mask death anymore, trying to make it look humane. That's just putting somebody to sleep. They pin a little red felt heart over his heart, and you have 6 people shooting. 1 has blanks, and you don't know who has the blanks. Now, why do they do that? They don't want any of them to know, yeah, you're the one who killed. And the diffusion of personal responsibility happens all over the place here. The DA said, well, he did the crime. I'm following the law. The jury made the decision. You know, then you have all the steps in the legal process. Well, and all the fingers are going like this. And then the warden says, well, I'm just carrying out what the state says to do. And I'm thrown right into it. And I'm looking into the eyes of a man. Here's the thing about human beings. You know, I thought the first time I went and actually visited with this man, and let me take you into the crime because it's so unspeakable. And this is the whole journey that we got to make. This is what Susan Sarandon saw when she read the book. She said, we need a new kind of film that's going to take people into the whole journey on both sides of the suffering. And both sides of the suffering are, what's the crime, who's suffering from that, the victim's family and what they're going through. Then let's talk about what it is that we're going to do as a society to say how we're going to deal with this problem of violence, which is what we're saying now in our policy, and a Supreme Court who reads the Eighth Amendment that says you don't practice cruel or unusual punishment and does not see the execution of human beings as cruel. They say, well, they did the crime. Equal justice means they kill, they die. Where else, think of this, where else in the criminal justice system do we ever imitate the behavior of the criminal in determining their punishment? Think if people in prison for rape, and every Friday night, rape squad, you raped, we're gonna rape you. And probably one of the reasons they don't do it is what's gonna happen to the rape squad every Friday night. They get to go rape people, and then we're gonna have these monsters on our hands from raping people. Or an arsonist, you burn down the house, we're gonna burn down your house. Look at it. You kill, we're gonna kill you. That's what justice demands. And if you ever go to a death penalty trial and you hear arguments, the closing arguments of a prosecutor going for death and saying to them, and look at that family sitting there, they're never gonna see their daughter alive again. They're never gonna see their grandchildren. And so when you go in there to vote, you give to him the justice, the kind of justice he did not give their daughter. As though the imitation of it, the repetition of the violence of it is going to be the solution. And because it happens behind prison walls, we have executed over 1,600 people in this country. Imagine if we did like China and put everybody in the stadium and it was all televised, and then they go behind their heads and shoot everybody in the head and they drop, and we'd see that, we could go, wait, what are we doing? There's a saying from Latin America, what the eye doesn't see, the heart can't feel. And here's why I'm before you today. Because God's call of grace, I feel like I fell down a laundry chute or something and ended up with this guy on death row. It just happened. But that's where grace calls us into places where people are suffering and where they're despised. Or Pope Francis talks about all the thrown away people, the disposable people. And believe me, when you get a death sentence in this country, you treat it like disposable human waste. And so when we look at Holy Week and we look at Jesus and his execution, and we look at the thrown away people of his day, where you'd see all those people hanging from those crosses, Pontius Pilate with all that power to kill or not, which we give to the state, the power to kill or not. And I'm going to come back to that and talk about the evolution of Catholic teaching. But what did Pat Saunier and Eddie Saunier do? Why were they there? Why was one brother on death row and the other got a life sentence? And on a November 4th night, two innocent teenage kids, Loretta Burke and David LeBlanc, had gone. It was at a Christian Brothers school in Thibodaux, Louisiana. They'd gone to a homecoming football game, had supper with their family, told them good night. David knew the rules, 11 o'clock to be home, and he was always good about that, keeping the time or calling if he was late. And David didn't come home afterwards. This is a good Catholic mom and dad. This is Lloyd LeBlanc and his wife, Eula. And by 12 o'clock at night, by 1 o'clock in the morning, they're pacing and saying the rosary and praying for their son. Please, God, protect our boy. He had never not called. He had never been late. And then in the morning, the terrible news, the sheriff's deputy at the front door saying, Lloyd, you better come with us. We need you to identify your boy's body. And there's David in the morgue. And the story of Lloyd LeBlanc, you can look him up in the index of the book and follow his story because he's a hero of that book. This is a man who showed us the Jesus way. He showed it with his life. And he loved David. He and David were alike. They knew how to fix cars. They knew how to do things together. He was close to his son. And now here he is in the morgue. And he looks down at the body of his son. Clearly, his son was gone. And he just said the prayer came out of him. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. He said, I said the words, but I didn't feel the words. I felt the opposite of those words, and all he could think of, and the anger started taking over him of how he wanted to put his hands around the throat of Pat and Eddie Saunier that had shot his son in the back of the head in cold blood and left his body to rot out in the sugarcane field on that November night. The journey begins. When you just think of violence that has happened to people, it's just staggering. It's stunning. It's traumatic. And you begin a whole new life. Your whole life suddenly changes. Your child is gone, your sister's gone, your mother's gone. And it's such a violent upheaval in your life. And Lloyd LeBlanc went on that whole journey. I mean, one of the things I discovered in working with victims' families is in the beginning, maybe anger is not a bad thing because it gets you out of bed in the morning, gets the adrenaline going. Yeah, let's bring on the trial so you don't succumb to despair and suicide. But with Lloyd, as he later told me, we got to be friends. And I got to tell you that I made a couple of bad mistakes in the first draft of Dead Man Walking. If I hadn't had a good editor, y'all never would have heard of me. I mean, you know, everything happens like a team. We need allies. I need the sisterhood of the Sisters of St. Joseph behind me. We need sisterhood. Look at Marquette. You got a community here. It's a gathering of people, you know. And so when I did the first draft of Dead Man Walking, and I sent it up to Jason Eckstein, who happened to be the blooming managing editor of the whole shebang, and I'm a first-time author. He gets my manuscript. He's going to be my editor. And we sit down with the manuscript together. He says, Sister Helen, you're a good, gritty writer. You bring out a lot of details. But nobody's going to read your book. Because she's a nun. She believes in the forgiveness of Jesus. They're going to expect every platitude to come out of your mouth. And that you're not going to be able to face the crime. You wait far too long in this story to tell about, look what Pat and Eddie Saunier did with these kids out in that sugarcane field. The girl was raped and they shot the kids in the back of the head. How brutal could you be? And you wait. If you don't talk about the brutality of what those two brothers did to those two innocent kids in the first 10 pages of this book, nobody's going to read your book because they're going to think you can't face it. You got to bring people over into the suffering of the victims, your own outrage at what happened to those kids and the suffering of their parents. And then you got to walk a very thin wire. You take them with you step by step by step into the execution of the person who did the crime and say, here's our solution. And we kill him, and you bring your reader with you. The power of a book is that when you're reading, it's like a meditation because you're quiet and you're not debating anybody. And the words, you're using your imagination, and you go there, and it can change your life. That was one thing. The other thing he said was, you didn't reach out at all to the victim's family. You didn't meet them till the pardon board, which is a public meeting, and that is where I met them. I heard they were so angry. I mean, Godfrey Bork, whose daughter had been killed, he's having his own little press conference thing saying, I can't wait to pull the switch. I'm trying to picture myself going to the front door saying, hi, I'm the spiritual advisor of the two people. I couldn't do it. So Jason says, he's looking, he says, you're kind of letting yourself off easy, aren't you? You just said, I never done it before, and I didn't want to increase their pain or get into a big argument with them. And he looks at me and he goes, it was cowardice, wasn't it? You were scared, weren't you? I went, yeah. Oh, yeah. He said, look, when you write your book, take your reader with you, not just when you did the peaks of the waves and did it all right. Take them into your mistakes, because then they're going to know you're human and they're going to trust you to tell them the whole story. And that's what happens. I went back, took another year, and rewrote, reshaped the story to include those elements, because there's a terrible tension. That was my biggest tension in writing the book, the victim's family. How are they going to feel about this, you know? I sent them the manuscript before it was published. I said, did I get it right? Is there anything wrong? And, you know, of course they disagreed with my point of view, but I felt in respect that I should send it to them. So the book was written in 1993. As I point out, Lloyd LeBlanc is the hero, and here's why. So here's this man. I meet him at the pardon board hearing. You couldn't be on more polar opposite sides. When you go to a pardon board meeting in New Orleans, in Louisiana, it's public, and you sign the blooming paper when you go in, what side you're on, literally, death or life. You want him to die or you want him to live? So, of course, I'm on the side with two other people, with two lawyers and a psychiatrist to try to plead for the life of Pat Sonia. And the victim's family are there with all their relatives and all their friends. They packed the place. And so afterwards, we were walking outside while the pardon board was voting, and I bumped right into them. And the Borks looked at me. They were furious at me. And they just walked past me. And right behind them were the LeBlancs, Lloyd and his wife Eula, and I expected the same anger, the same rejection, which I kind of deserved because I didn't reach out. I didn't try even. And he walks right up to me and he goes, Sister Helen, I'm a Catholic. This is Eula, my wife. She's a Catholic. Sister, all this time you've been visiting with those two brothers, and you didn't want to come to see us. Sister, everybody around me is telling me, Lloyd, you got to be for the death penalty. You got to be for the death penalty. He said, look, Eula and I even go to Mass at different churches on Sunday to see if we could hear it from the pulpit, a priest telling us, but look, this is the gospel of Jesus, you know, not to ask for a death for a death. And we couldn't hear it anywhere. And people think forgiveness is weak. And I've been all alone. And where have you been? And I was so wrong. Oh, so wrong. And I needed his mercy and I needed his forgiveness. And I just said, Mr. LeBlanc, I'm so sorry. And he said, look, I pray in this little chapel on Friday mornings. Come pray with me. So I go, fine, yeah, okay, I'll come. What time do you pray? He goes, 4 to 5 in the morning. Over in the chapel in St. Martinville, you know that Catholic thing of keeping adoration of the Blessed Sacrament all hours of the night, you know, all that comes, all our different ways of praying that we have as Catholics, to pray the rosary, to adoration, quiet, meditation on the scriptures, the rosary, the Stations of the Cross. These are all, and Pope Francis talks about this, these are devotions that kind of, poor example, but like grease the wheels of devotion that bring us close to God. We need those. And so with this man, here I am, leaving at 2:30 in the morning to drive across the Atchafalaya swamp to get to St. Martinville, and there he is waiting outside this chapel. And we go in and we pray the rosary together. And it's a Friday, so it's the sorrowful mysteries of the rosary. And I'm kneeling alongside a man who is praying through the agony and death of his only son. And we're praying together. And he gradually comes to trust me. Then I stay over for breakfast, and he shares his journey with me. And it was the anger, the being consumed by the anger, and then yelling at his wife and making Eula cry. And Vicky's his daughter. He's ignoring her. He's getting consumed and consumed. All I want to do is kill these people who killed our son. And then it's this moment of grace. He prayed for it. He sought for it. He waited for it. And God's grace. And he had the realization. And when he told me about it, he just said, he put his hand out like that and said, then I said, they killed our boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And he said, I've always been a kind man. I love to help people. I'm good with my hands. If I see somebody broken down on the side of the road 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to stop and help them because that's who I am. I was losing who I was. I had a victim's family one time tell me, it's like I was drinking the poison of hatred and I hope it killed him. What a journey. What a journey. And those of us who sit in an armchair looking at this, we're in a very safe space, and many of us have never suffered this before. And so we have to be really humble when we are in the presence of people who are going through such sacred suffering. But he brought me in. He said, people think forgiveness is weak. Like somehow you're saying, I condone what you did. You killed my son and it's okay. But look at the word, forgive. Why does Jesus talk about forgiveness so much? Why do all the spiritual masters in Buddhism talk about forgiveness and mercy so much? Why? Because you see it in Lloyd LeBlanc that you're not overtaken by the hatred and you lose your own soul. Forgive. You give before. I am not, with God's grace, going to let this hatred take over me. I'm going to maintain the love that you have put in my heart to be a loving and kind person. And that's the gift of Lloyd LeBlanc, and that's why I say he's a hero of that book. So what do victims' families need? You know what our governor's claiming right now? Governor Jeff Landry in Louisiana? Justice for the victim's family demands that we start getting these executions going because we've had a 22-year hiatus in Louisiana and we haven't killed anybody. And that's a national movement. It's happening across the country. Juries don't want to give death penalty. DAs aren't seeking death penalties as much. Where are they happening? In the 10 ex-slave states, and where governors have the power and DAs have the power to seek death. It's called the last divine right of kings. And the way the Supreme Court set up the death penalty, getting to the law a little bit here, is in the Gregg decision in 1976. They set up that we are going to have the death penalty again in the United States. And there are 2 really important parts of it. One is the criteria. You're not going to give the death penalty for anything. And finally, it's boiled down to it's got to be murder, can't be rape. And not just any murder. It can't be for ordinary murder. It's got to be for the worst of the worst murders. Now tell me, how are we going to distinguish? Well, somebody killed my mama, but it didn't happen during a felony. Was your mama raped? Was your mama robbed? Oh, she was just killed? Doesn't count. You come to human beings have to make decisions and do fine points, which is what the law does. But it's an impossible criteria. And it's coupled with, and this is why Jeff Landry can get away with this. This is why Trump, before he left office the last time, could tell Bill Barr, his great Catholic attorney general, get these 13 people killed on federal death row because he had the power to initiate it. They coupled that fuzzy criteria with the discretionary power of DAs to seek it or not. You never, ever have to seek death, ever. But they make decisions to seek death. And what's behind that? Why do you see this pattern that over 75% of all the executions sought happened in the 10 southern states? You know race has got to be a part of it. In the McCleskey decision of the Supreme Court, they acknowledge that race plays a big part in the criminal justice system. You know where you really see the race, a factor? Is who did you kill? And it's when white people are killed, or people who have status who are killed when the death penalty is sought. When people of color are killed, unless they're a policeman, it's almost never even seriously investigated. If the life doesn't have value, the death doesn't have value, and you're not going to seek the ultimate punishment. We're just human beings. And you have all these judgments coming in. You have people's bias. You have people's ignorance. And you get caught in these currents. And I see it. You can see it. I mean, Bob Macy in Oklahoma County, he was responsible for 54 people sent to death row in Oklahoma. One of them happened to be Richard Glossop, whose case I got involved with, and we got good lawyers in there. And it looks like it might save his life. But one guy is responsible for 54. And, you know, you think of Pontius Pilate. You think of the power that he had. Pontius Pilate was terrible. He was responsible for the death of thousands of people. In the Gospel of John, he's almost presented like a philosopher, you know, well, what is truth? The kind of deep reflection of the believing community afterwards. But he was a terrible despot. He had thousands of people executed. He was cruel. And you give that kind of power to governments to decide, to individual DAs, and now to governors to carry out, and a president who will carry it out. I mean, you got to know there was a lot of scurrying going on behind the scenes to get to President Biden. Please don't let Trump get in there and kill all the people on federal rope, because he's going to do it. Commute the sentences. We hoped he'd commute all of them. He did almost all of them. But he saved 37 lives by that decision. But look at that power in the hands of this individual. And so now we come to the evolution, development of the Catholic Church on the teaching on the death penalty. And don't be surprised that in moral teachings, things develop and change. I mean, look at the history in the church where we upheld slavery. I mean, you'd go to a Catholic church on a Sunday morning and you'd hear the priest quoting, "Slaves, be obedient to your masters," because you can find the words in Scripture. It's called proof texting. Oh, well, look, St. Paul said, be obedient, so therefore that's God's will. So to the plantation owners, now be kind to your slaves. And then it's all up to them. And the women were raped, and oh my God. When people are property, when they don't have agency over their bodies and over their lives, and when you look closely at the penal system, and you look closely at the death penalty, where's the agency over your life? You move like a package, as Albert Camus, he wrote Reflections on the Guillotine in France in 1954, and changed the debate there. And it was about, you don't have any agency over your life. You're a package. They're going to move you. They may give you a stay of execution. Dobie Gillis Williams, he's the first story in Death of Innocence, an African-American man who was railroaded through, supposedly for killing a white woman in this little town. He was brought into the death house 3 times to be killed. He got to stay 1 hour before twice. Brought back to his cell, no, we'll kill you later. How can the Supreme Court not see that human beings are imaginative and conscious and anticipate? Lord, I had a root canal, And I was anticipating that root canal. I couldn't wait for that root canal to be over. Because I mean, oh man, what's it going to be like? I looked at the video. Man, you know, it's a root canal, but I'm anticipating it. And the people I've known on death row all have the same nightmare. The same nightmare. It's my time. They're coming for me. The guards are coming in my cell. And I'm screaming and I'm kicking. I'm going, no, no. And then I wake up and I look around. I'm in my cell. Oh, it's not my time. But you watch as others are led in front of your cell to be executed ahead of you, like Joseph Odell. He's the second story in Death of Innocence. He watched over 20 friends be led in front of his cell to be executed ahead of him. What does it mean? Why are we doing this? How did it happen? How does it keep on happening? So now we come to the Catholic Church, and this is why Pope Francis is emphasizing so much about synods. Synods. Because you know what a synod is? Is where you have people gathered together and you get the wisdom of the whole community coming up. If you look at any of those synod meetings that happen, they have these little round tables. They got 10 people sitting, and you might have a teenager sitting next to a cardinal. They each got 10 minutes. So the kid talks, the cardinal talks, the cardinal keeps talking, and they say, what do you call me, your holiness, your honor, your whatever, your cardinalship? 10 minutes, your 10 minutes are up. But it's getting the wisdom of everybody in the church bubbling up. That's the way the Spirit of God works. That's the way social consciousness changes. That is how our consciences change. Us gathering together, just like this. And so it starts bubbling up in the church. First of all, you begin to notice more and more deacons are going into prisons. You got people like me who come down the laundry chute. We start going onto death row. And people, you witness to what you have seen and you share it with the community, what we're doing now. And it starts bubbling up in the Catholic Church. And so one of the things that happened, and this is in my second book, with Joseph Odell, that Italy got involved, and I got to have a direct dialogue with Pope John Paul. And my dialogue with him wasn't any different from what I'm doing with you. Like, you don't have special Pope language, and you go, well, I'm talking to the Pope. I brought him in. I just said, look, when I'm walking with a man to execution, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life? So you hear Catholics say, I'm pro-life, but they mean innocent life, not guilty life. That's different. Draw a line, very different. And I said, to take a person and to render him completely defenseless. And I'm walking with them with my hand on their shoulder, and they're saying, sister, please pray God holds up my legs. And they're strapped down, and then they're rendered defenseless, and they're killed. Where is the dignity in that death? Is it only the innocent that have dignity? And you go to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states in Article 3, simply by being a human being, we have an inalienable right to life. That's the Universal Declaration. But in Catholic teaching, it had been that we kept upholding the right of the state to take life. And that has a historical reason, because St. Augustine said it first, the violent can be coerced with the sword, because you had the Goths and the Visigoths and the Huns breaking down the gates of Rome and chaos everywhere. And that's the first time then he said the violent can be coerced with the sword, that we can give over to state governments the power to coerce the violent. But it's always about defending society. It was always about defense. It was never this imitation thing. You killed, so we're going to kill you because that's what justice means. It was always about, when you had Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century, when he talked about, the execution of people who were violent, He compared it to you have a gangrenous arm and you amputate it for the health of the body. It's always about defense and the health of the whole body, never about this tit for tat, you kill, we kill you thing. So when I got to talk to the Pope, and I just said, I was one part of the dialogue. It was all bubbling up, the way consciousness changes when the moment comes in time. And he did it. He was the first one. He stood up in St. Louis for the first time in 1999 and said, no to euthanasia, no to abortion, no to physician-assisted suicide, and no to the death penalty. First time he ever included the death penalty in the other pro-life issues. And he added what I call the magic words, because this is going to be no exceptions. Even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. And with that, then you had Pope Francis change the Catholic Catechism, August 2018, stating, no matter how grievous the crime, we can never give over to governments that absolute power over life to kill its citizens. That's how we grow, like we're doing today. We grow, and you ate food. Where's our I want y'all to see this because we need your help. Anyway, I want to ask for your help because this is our ministry against the death penalty. And we have the graphic Dead Man Walking that's coming out in the fall. Going to ask Marquette to be one of the launchers of it because we got to get to the young people of this country about human rights, and Catholics need to know this development, that dignity is not just simply for the innocent, but even for the guilty, and that we got to get engaged in being active and raising our voices for the death and helping the southern states like us that are still killing people. Remember how we had the slave states and the ones that didn't have slavery, how the slave states needed the people? Well, that's how we need you, because we got it going on in the southern states. So here's the ministry against death penalty of the Sisters of St. Joseph, this sassy little group of nuns that started this thing, and we're still doing it, still educating the public. And now we're getting the graphic Dead Man Walking out there, and we're going to get it out to young people. And we need your help. We need your help. So anyway, that's going to be the magical, why isn't it appearing?
It's coming.
It's coming. Anyway, thank you for whatever and there are envelopes outside if you want to write a check.
We're going to take a couple of questions for Sister Helen before she leaves.
Yeah, or comment.
Anybody have any questions?
Come on. Yeah.
1 second. Wait.
We're going to give you a microphone real quick.
Oh, thank
No. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. Your presentation and just your heart for your work was so moving. Thank you so much for being here in this space to be able to just articulate and share with us this important issue. I've been in many different spaces, detention centers, prisons, just figuring out ways to support community. As you know or may not know, Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the country. And so when you talk about, you look in this room, there's a diversity of, age and gender and,
Right.
where we live that are in this particular space. What would you share with people as to, because I think a lot of times communities struggle or people struggle with, well, what's that first step? How can I help? Because they listen to the news, they read the papers,
That's right.
and it just feels like doom and gloom. And especially in this, what we're dealing right now with the federal government. What is kind of a first step that you can share with us?
The first step is to let your heart catch on fire, that you care about prisoners. You care about thrown away people. And then you start looking, and this is spirit in your heart. First of all, in your own church community, is there any kind of prison
Patrick, it went off
ministry?
again.
Start looking, start checking. Can you write to prisoners? Can you visit prisoners? The direct contact with prisoners. What did Jesus say? See, we are our own little spin doctors with these scriptures, y'all. I was in prison and you came to me. So who's going to make the effort? It's going to be you. So you look for ways to directly start looking who are the groups involved in penal reform, juveniles that are sent to prison, you know. And look, and there's that magic, that QR thing. I hope y'all know how to work it. I don't know that I do. But, okay, another question?
When I saw Dead Man Walking, it was a profound effect, and I just thank you for your ministry and for being here today. One of the things that I've always kind of struggled with in seeing the film was the transformation that happened in the life of the Sean Penn character, who for a great deal of the film was, in denial and his own anger and his own issues. And then through your attentiveness and through just being there, there was a kind of a redemption for him that happened. And what I've struggled with is how have you experienced with people like that, this sense of redemption, and how much of that came about because they were going through this?
There you go. That's the question. At the Berlin Film Festival, there was an international corps of press, and that was the first question asked Tim Robbins. Well, Mr. Robbins, isn't there kind of theology in this? If Matthew Poncelet hadn't been faced with the death penalty, would he ever come to grips with what he did? And I looked at Tim, I said, how's he going to answer that question? And he just said, and he got to the heart of it, he just said, what was the thing that saved Matthew Poncelet and allowed him to acknowledge what he had done and ask forgiveness for it? Was it the threat of death? See, when someone's an outlaw, it hardens them. It just hardens them. Oh, yeah, you think you can get me? Or was it the love and trust that he had found in my love and trust that allowed his soul to open and flower and acknowledge, because he could trust somebody who showed him care. And if you know something of his story, he had never known that in his life before. Interesting. You hit the heart of the question with that one. Over there, I see a hand. Oh, are you somewhere else?
I've read a book by Father Shoup on purgatory. Quite a really compelling and extensive collection of insights about how people's lives can be changed in the last 10 seconds. And thinking about your bubbling up of the spirit.
Yeah.
What we do if we kill someone who can otherwise be incarcerated to, in quotes, protect society from someone who is a danger. When we take away their natural time of passing,
Right.
taking away their 10 seconds of bubbling.
There you go.
5 years.
There you go. That's a big, big point of Pope Francis. It's a big point of the blooming Gospels. Human beings can always change. Do we crystallize someone in the worst moment of their life? When you hear sometimes when DAs are pushing for the death penalty saying, we can't trust them to be in prison, even for life. They'll kill other inmates. They're natural-born killers. And they demonize them. They crystallize them. They are killers. Human beings can always change. And the warden at Louisiana State Penitentiary, one of them, I've been through a number of these wardens in these years. They even let me drive in at this point. But he said, look, people get here. You know who make our best trustees, who change and can be trustees? What crime they come in is for murder. Most people who commit murder didn't know that morning they were going to kill somebody. And they get inside the discipline of the prison and they read books. And they learn how to care for each other, and they change. One time a guard, during an execution, said to me, the man we're killing tonight is a very different man from that young, brash animal that came into this prison cursing God and everybody. He changed. And we're going to kill him anyway? And that's why you can't ever entrust over to government that absolute power to make a judgment This life is finished, and we have the wisdom and the system to set up to terminate their life. We can't do that. And that's what we got to understand as Catholics, and understand how deep Jesus is, how deep the message is about forgiveness and loving each other and never being curtailed or hemmed in or stymied by hatred. There's so much, just signals out there of you can't trust people, you got to be hard on people. Your John Wayne Jesus coming to the fore, We got to use a little violence. We got a president that says, smash that reporter in the face. I mean, that we use force and violence. That's not the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus, what we doing today? Persuasion. We share with each other our witness. I have a feeling there's a hulking presence. I think I gotta go. But I'm there to sign your books for you.
Can we give it up for Sister Helen, please?